This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. This week, my guest is the great Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports. We'll talk about trying to play sports, college football in particular, through a pandemic, college player empowerment, and the NCAA targeting Confederate imagery. This has been anything but a normal June in college football and across college sports. Usually the quietest month on the calendar. There has been plenty of news, and Dan always provides an interesting view from 30,000 feet. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast and Apple Podcasts, just about anywhere you like to get your podcast. Please subscribe, and if so inclined, give us a good review. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans. And away we go. Joining me on the podcast today is Dan Wetzel, the great Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports. Hey, Dan, thanks so much for joining me today. There's a whole lot of news going on in college football, and I wanted to tap into you because while college football is not necessarily the thing in college sports that you do all the time, you always have a keen insight on the sport. And I want to, first of all, good talking to you. I hope everything is well in your world.
Everything's great. Hope it's the same for you, Ralph.
Yeah, we're all hanging in there on this side of the country. Let's start with this, because we got a pandemic, we have social unrest, we have player empowerment, we have the NCAA trying to insert itself in some ways that seem awkward and hypocritical to some. Let's start with simply the idea of trying to play football. We're in the process now of taking these baby steps towards a football season, which involves getting athletes back on campus. We're seeing quite a few reports of positive tests coming out of these campuses, though quite a few campuses are also, schools are coming back with, just a handful of tests after hundreds of being taken that are positive. So I guess what I want to ask you about, Dan, is how essential is college football? Because that's what I've been struggling with, of trying to come up with, how essential is this enterprise? I think it makes sense that we should try to go forward with our lives as normal as possible, but the power dynamic here in college football is not like pro sports.
First off, as you mentioned, pandemic, social unrest, player empowerment, and name, image, and likeness. Do people still ask you, what do you write and talk about when there's no games?
I've never been busier. It's honestly one of the most busy off seasons since realignment.
It really is. I'm like, who needs a game? My God, I don't have time for games. Is college football essential? It's extremely essential, at least for my life, my entertainment. And I think that's actually the problem we have. I find it extremely essential. Is it really? No, probably not. And so how do you make that determination? It's like, if you're the NFL or you're the NBA, this is your business. So you open and run your business. But when you're college athletics and you're not supposed to be quite a business, what do you do? Because very little is essential in the world. Is this breakfast joint essential? No, people can eat somewhere else. But if you own the breakfast joint, it's essential. So, how do you weigh that and figure it out? In truth, if they say the quiet parts out loud, like Mike Gundy did, they need the money. They need the money to keep their jobs, to fund other sports, to cut losses against the university. The towns need it. I think I saw the mayor of Tuscaloosa claiming they might lose $2 billion.
Yeah, that was an overshoot by that mayor, but still, it's a lot of money. I mean, it's not $2 billion, but it's still a lot.
It was a massive overshoot. I've if there's $2 billion a year coming in here, where are you putting it? I mean, I love Tuscaloosa, but it's not like Lower Manhattan. Okay, you're like, okay, is it all going to the Dreamland barbecue joint? So, but look, there are huge economic realities and all that. So I don't know. What do you do? Obviously, they want to play, and the part to me that I think is interesting is for the players. You go to college. You don't. Trevor Lawrence isn't going to make millions of dollars next year playing football. He will in 2 years. That's fine. Okay, that's the deal he signed up for. But part of what he gets is leading a campus and running it down the hill, touch the rock and run down the hill, and there's 80,000 people and all the just the stuff that makes college football awesome. Well, all of a sudden they're losing that, right? We don't know. We'll see. But let's say there's only 10,000, 20,000 people at Clemson Stadium. That's not the same. What if campus ends up in the middle of the semester, has to go online? What if, you're isolated from the student body because you've got to keep this guy away? Like, all the things that make college football great, they have to kind of take away. And I think it's more like, I don't really care if LeBron James has to run out onto a court and there's no pregame introductions for the crowd. He's getting paid $30 million to do it. But you do kind of feel bad for the players who have a finite career, and they're going to have a very different type season. And they're really just being propped up there to be like, we need you to make us money, but we're not even giving you the deal that we signed you up for, all the fun stuff. And now we'll see. Maybe it's 50% stadiums, maybe it's 100, maybe it's 0. Maybe there's all the games, but it's quite possible this is like a Jenga tower. There's just so many unknowns that I kind of feel bad for the players that are getting tossed in, and they're not going to get I'm sure Trevor Lawrence expected his junior year to go one way, and he's not going to get that full thing. What degree of close to full he gets, we'll find out, but it's not what he signed up for.
Yeah. I hate to measure it all on dollars. There is value in the experience of playing college football. These guys and athletes in any college sport, they have dedicated so much of their lives to getting to this point. To take it away from them and sort of say like, well, you guys don't make any money, you'll be fine. There's absolutely value here, but the fact that, but to a certain degree, you'd be naive to not put money into that equation, right? Just as you said, Trevor Lawrence not having the junior season he expected is definitely something that is a loss for Trevor Lawrence, but that Clemson breakfast joint that might have to close because there wouldn't be a season because they would just get wiped out financially, that's a much greater impact, which makes me sort of this irony of things about this irony of the farther you get away from the field in some ways in college sports, the more it becomes essential for the people involved. Like for the players, even if you want to take into use money to value everything, the players, as far as their pro prospects are concerned, there's still going to be a draft next year. There's still going to be the same amount of players drafted. There might be some players who will improve their stock this year, and if the games aren't played, maybe they won't, right? Joe Burrow completely changed his life in 1 year. But the same amount of opportunities will still be given for for players to go pro next year. But again, as the farther you get away from the field, the more the sport becomes essential, and that just seems, and because the other part of that is the people who are putting the most at risk have the least essentialness, if that's a word.
Yeah, and I think, and again, it's not just money; it's value of experience, right? So, what's the best? I don't know what a college football player would say is his best experience, but I bet a lot of it is like when you talk to him, hanging around the guys, the locker room, after practice, you go over this guy's house and everyone's playing. Well, what if that's not allowed?
Right.
I don't know what the protocols are going to be, but what if it's like Okay, you have to get in. These 5 guys can get into a locker room and change at the same time, and everyone's out. You lose that camaraderie, all the fun stuff, just lifting weights together as a team. Nope, you can't do that. I don't know. Again, we don't know how it's going to be, but you can see some of those things and go. Like, ideally, you would just sit there and say, hey, we're not going to have a college this isn't ideally. Ideally, we play football, believe me. But you say, we're just not going to do it this year. We'll be back next year, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you've seen some of the Boston Marathon, okay? We're not having a Boston Marathon this year. We'll have one next year, okay? Deal with it, whatever. Like, there's really no – I'm sure there's some places that lost some money. But for the runners, it's like, okay, I'll just run again next year. And everybody just gets a free year of college and just waits a year. Obviously, some guys would go pro, but whatever. They can't really do that, or at least they're not planning on doing that. So it's just it's weird. Look, it's never made any sense. Okay, as much as we love it,
right.
The whole sport makes no sense. But it doesn't make any sense to have these massive football operations or basketball operations attached to a institute of higher learning. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. No one would design this. They don't design it anywhere else in the world. Now, that's part of what makes it, in my opinion, just one of the greatest experiences ever, and has captured my imagination since I first heard of this sport. But it doesn't make any sense, and it really doesn't make any sense during a pandemic. And so here we are. But I don't know. This is how life works right now, and you lose the place that thought, hey, I sell breakfast on game day, and that's what pays my rent the whole year. There may not be a game day. There's a lot of change. You thought if you owned an airport bar, you'd never lose money. There's a lot of businesses that were like, boy, I thought I was foolproof, and then a pandemic came along. So it's just so hard for everyone to balance this and figure it out. And I said this on our podcast. I equate this whole thing to and I know not everyone's driven in the snow, but driving through a snowstorm, like on the highway when you have to drive for 4 or 5 hours through a blizzard or something like that. And you're like, yeah, I know how to drive in the snow. I can, I won't skid out probably. I'll just really, you have to white knuckle the wheel, and you pay attention, and you just hope disaster doesn't strike. And I just feel like that's what college football is embarking on right now. All right, let's go. We can maybe make it. We could probably make it if we just stay on the road, but there could be some black ice here, or we could get a whiteout here, or a truck could hit us here. So many things can happen. And by the end of this thing, when you get to your final destination, you're not celebrating it with the confetti coming down. It's more just going to be oh, my God, I don't ever want to do that again, right?
Yeah, this is going to be an exhausting next 6 months. I guarantee that for all of us involved, and some more so than others. So with that, and these two stories are now linked because we talk about essential. What is essential, and how essential are the players, and how essential is it for them to play? The other big story that's gripping the country is social unrest, having to do with the demonstrations and protests of police brutality and of social injustice and racial equality in this country. And that is affecting college sports as well. And we're seeing players empowered. And we're seeing players empowered not because their voices, and that phrase is being thrown around a lot, voices, platforms, and things like that, to the point where it becomes almost cliche. But their voices are being heard more often. And I think it's not coincidental that these players are emboldened to speak out, not just because their cause and they are being more valued, but because I think they also look at it and say, hey, you're making us go play in a pandemic. You're going to listen to me.
I agree. And I think the young people, they clearly do have a platform. They're not as scared of the coaches as they, can you imagine walking into Bo Schembechler and saying this stuff, it's just speaking up at all.
Let me go off on a tangent here, Dan.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good thing in college sports, that the coaches are really are yielding so much of this power to the athletes?
I think we're better off if people are allowed to freely speak their opinions and stuff. I would think that we would be far better off if that speaking was done in the. If I was a coach, I would try to get my team together, and this is part of the problem too. Is you have the best way to deal with this changing dynamic would be to have lots of meetings, and lots of team-wide meetings and teams. And now you can't necessarily do that because you have a pandemic. So, like, you have all the stuff comes after George Floyd, and these guys have to try to do Zoom calls with people. Like, that's not the way you want to communicate. But I would want them to be free to come and speak to me personally and address a lot of issues that have never been addressed in the power dynamic of college sports without throwing it up on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a better way than doing anything on social. Social media is not good for pretty much anything. But I do think I think we're better off that way. But I'm not someone who thinks that being young and learning to go with the program in general and be part of something bigger than yourself, and understanding individual sacrifice creates group success and things like that. I think there's great value in that to learn, because at 18 you're inherently a selfish person, just naturally. So you almost have to fight that urge to overcome that. And a lot of through society, 18-year-olds actually seek that out, whether it's through teams or the military or different things. They want that discipline and stuff. So it's a little bit of a trickier thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing. But certainly the players feel this way. And here's what I'm interested in finding out as college football gets closer, because we just started to see it as we're taping this with the NBA, is Trevor Ariza saying, look, I'm not going to play this year. I get 1 month with my son. He's 12. It's hugely valuable to me to spend that time as a parent. So it's in August when the NBA normally is off. I'm going to take that time to be with my son. I'm not going to play, right? And you go, okay. And there are other players saying, look, maybe I'm injured. Maybe I got a huge free agent contract. They're making personal decisions. How many college players at the end of this will say, not Trevor Lawrence, not your stars, but the guy who's on the team saying, I'm going to redshirt this year. Mm-hmm. I want a redshirt. I don't want to play under these circumstances, and not just the risk of catching the coronavirus, because I think almost all these college kids are going to catch the coronavirus. But like we said, this could be an 8-game season. Like, we're not running out in the field. And I'm a sophomore, and if I redshirt and take, like, how many of those guys, when that comes, is there going to be 5 kids a team? Is there going to be 5 kids in the country? Is there going to be, huge swaths of kids saying, because, what if you're the sophomore, second-string linebacker at University of Ohio, and you're just like, you know what, I'll take that extra year. I'm going to sit this out. This isn't what I signed up for. I'm really intrigued to see that, and that will be kind of that confluence of all of a sudden I've got some power and I've got this pandemic to work in, and how many will do that? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm guessing it's going to be more than one.
Yeah, I wonder the problem would be with that is that because there's so much uncertainty, it's hard for them to know how much they're losing until maybe they've done it, right? Because you could go into the season, you could head towards September, toward Labor Day, thinking we're going to get all our games in, and then all of a sudden November rolls around and you're like, man, we've only played 5 times.
Right.
What's going on here? And now it's too late. And now forget if you're the sophomore at Ohio. If you're the freshman at Ohio State who's thinking, I'm only a backup this year, but I still have big things in my future, and now I've just burned this season on a season that's not even a season. Was it really worth my time? And I think that, again, my biggest fear for those kids is that they won't be able to make that decision until they realize it's too late. It will be fascinating to see how that plays out. Let me hit on this before we take a quick break, because we talked about player empowerment, and your colleague, my friend, both of our friends, your podcast buddy, Pete Thamel, wrote a story about Mike Gundy, who really got exposed throughout this whole thing as being a little tone deaf. And Pete dug a little deeper and found that, while a lot of coaches are really going completely overboard and out of their way to try to make sure that they're connected with their players during a time when that's very tough, when we're hearing lots of stories about that, it seems like Mike Gundy hasn't really lived up to that standard. I'm getting the feeling like when I look at that, like Mike Gundy is something like 3-12 against Oklahoma. I mean, part of my thinking is like, I'm sure you can find somebody to go 3-12 against Oklahoma and not pay $5 million a year and embarrass your university. Yeah, give me a couple of your thoughts on what to make out of this Gundy situation. And quite frankly, his players may have done him the greatest service by not necessarily hanging him out to dry.
Yeah, well, it was a fascinating story by Pete, and Gundy himself admitted that when, Hubbard said, felt he was disconnected, he actually was introspective about it, and he admitted acknowledged it was probably correct. What was interesting is it seems like it was something that everyone in Stillwater knew, but he has so much power that there was no administrator, no rabbi, if you will, that could sit there and say, hey, man, you've got to fix this. That he was on cruise control and he wasn't connecting with players. He wasn't as involved as he had been. He didn't know all their names. Things like that were really crazy incidents in this. And what I just found fascinating was, like, this was a punch to the face getting called out on Twitter like that. And it actually jolted him to look into it and go, yeah, I got to do better. Now, we'll see if he does or doesn't. And I don't know obviously none of us know all the dynamics, but it was a very, very interesting story. And it showed it was more than just, he wore a T-shirt of a cable channel. It wasn't that. It was all the other stuff that was going on. And the fact that he wasn't even talking to players during this time. And it was like, you got time to go fishing and watch cable TV, but you don't have time to have a meeting with us or really work it. So, and all the players talk to each other they're all friends, not all friends, but they have other friends at other schools. So they hear what's going on. They're like, well, our coach is doing this. They're like, hey, our coach is doing nothing. So very interesting. In general with Mike Gundy, I almost, and I don't know, but I know that's his alma mater and stuff, but I almost feel like he just needs a change of scenery. He needs a new challenge. He had a lot of success at a pretty young age, but I don't know that he still thinks he can get. I think when he started, he thought I can get Oklahoma State to be better than Oklahoma, and
that's just not true.
Championship.
Yeah.
And he got, they had their moments where I'm not going to say you're going to be better than Oklahoma long term, but they had their moments where they were really good, but he didn't get there, and it is almost like. It's just easy. You're there that long, and it's like I'm making $5 million a year, and maybe beating Oklahoma is really hard. Not many people beat Oklahoma. That's the challenge. That's why they're Oklahoma, right? Like in that part of the Texas can't beat them consistently. So, and it's almost like I just feel like this is a guy who almost could use like a new play. Like it's hard to coach the same school for that many years.
Though I do also wonder if because he is so tied to that school, and now with some of these other things, he's flirted with tons of schools in the past, 5 or 6 years. His name constantly comes up for this job and that, and he's always ended up staying. T. Boone Pickens, God rest his soul, always managed to find a couple extra bucks on the cushions for him. So you also wonder now with all these things sort of piling up on Gundy, could he go somewhere else? I think your point. I think your point's right. He's done a really good job at Oklahoma State closing the gap on Oklahoma, then realizing that but more often than not, I'm just going to lose to Oklahoma. But now, where would he fit where he's not the favorite son, which is what he is at Oklahoma State?
Yeah, I don't know that he could at this point. It's certainly not a job that would elevate him to like a national title contender. So like would one of the, what I would say top 6 schools at the SEC that are all, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, would one of those schools, and I'm probably missing somebody. Who am I missing? Maybe
Georgia,
not.
Florida.
Maybe
Yeah, well, that's about right. I mean, you want to throw an A&M or an Auburn in there, yeah.
Right. Those I don't need the hate mail from.
I got you covered.
You didn't mention. You don't think we can win national title? I don't say that. Texas A&M could win national title.
Sure.
Could he get one of those jobs where you're going to end up down again in the pecking order, fighting your way to the top? And that. So then it's. I think that's kind of his issue. Where he's at. I don't know. I don't know that anyone would want to hire him. He's a difficult guy. I mean, that's kind of part of what makes him great. He's a very hard-headed guy. That's the beauty and that's the beast. And so who wants to hire him? That becomes your issue. But I just feel like it's a tough deal. He's got Oklahoma State to a point where it's like, all right, we're better than average Big 12 team, and if all our stars align, maybe we can get to a playoff. Maybe, but we're 3-12 against Oklahoma. Oklahoma's they just sit there and they're hard to move. And it's really, I think also, like, if you look at these guys that had 20-plus year careers at the same school, he's been there 15 seasons now?
Yeah, I think it is 15 now.
Yeah, so he's 3-12, right? So he's heading – those are rare. And I think they're even more rare going forward. To beat Joe Paterno and just hang out for 45, and it's not easy. And Lavelle Edwards, how many guys went 20-plus seasons at a place?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a total dinosaur at this point.
You're better off being Saban and bouncing and like getting new opportunities and challenge. We'll see. Dabo might be able to do it, but you got to have a hell of a lot of success. But, new challenges keep guys fresh. And you take Saban, who I think is probably the best coach for this era. We'll see what Dabo ends up doing. But, he's at Michigan State, and he's at LSU. Then he takes the NFL, and it didn't quite work out in Miami. If they signed Drew Brees, it would probably be different. We'd never have him back in college, but they didn't. And then he comes back. And I think at all those spots, your juices get just recharged. The challenge is there. And now, and he's obviously, I think he's going to finish his career at Alabama. But even then, there was always chatter that, and I know fans go crazy and say he never took the job. When a guy's never a candidate at all, like, you never hear their name. Mm-hmm. So, like, it's not that Saban was ever going to leave, but he was talking to enough people like, maybe. And he's never left. But, like, nobody ever said Joe Paterno was taking I think he got offered the Patriots job once or something like that.
Yeah, in the 70s, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just – so it's not a bad thing to move every 10 years or so. I just think – so I think that's kind of the spot Mike Gundy's in. It's a very interesting position because you can love him or you can hate him or you can just think he's he's a character. The guy's got a mullet on I love characters and I like interesting people. Mike Gundy is interesting to me, even if you are someone who hates him or whatever your opinion, he's undoubtedly someone you at least have an opinion on. And I like those guys in sport.
Okay, let me take a quick break here on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I want to hit you up on your thoughts on Confederate flags, the NCAA, and a little bit on, I'm not a NASCAR guy, but I know you follow the sport a little bit, but I don't feel like you can't get into that conversation without touching on the news of the week. So we're on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast, talking with the great Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports, and we'll be back right after this.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
Back on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast, I'm talking with Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports. Dan, so the Confederate flag has been in the news a lot over the last couple of weeks, mostly focused on NASCAR. Let's just start with that, and I want to sort of back into the NCAA part of this. I've never liked NASCAR, and it really doesn't have anything to do with Confederate flags. I just don't have any interest in cars, so that's just my thing. But you're a little more plugged into this sport. You seem to, just by following you, I can tell you sort of you like this sport a little bit. What happened with Bubba Wallace this past week? Just the fact that this investigation happened and they found that there was no hate crime, like that's in some ways that's no harm, no foul. Though I also think that I'm just interested in your thoughts on this view that. To me, I felt like NASCAR maybe owed it to Bubba and to its enterprise to maybe it could have gone about that in a different way and not been so public about the investigation. Could that have been looked at behind the scenes? So when you end up with this result, you end up getting blowback against Bubba, which is totally unfair. And now I think you end up losing a little of your credibility if you're NASCAR. I don't know. That was my one takeaway from a story that I have not been really plugged in on. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, yeah, I do cover some NASCAR. I've been to a lot of tracks and all that. Been to Talladega. The Confederate flag and like they talk about it as like the third rail of America, and there's a reason, because if you touch the third rail, even if you're trying to fix it, you can die, right? I mean, it is a dangerous thing. If you don't live anywhere there's a subway, the third rail is the part that powers the subway. I've used that example before. People are like, what the heck is the third rail? Okay. You, Ralph, would know.
I know exactly
how the subway operates. Yes. So the third rail for people who live in cities is well known, not so much everywhere else. But the third rail is a highly electrified rail that powers the subway. So you need it, but you don't want to touch it. Don't ever touch the third rail. Well, here it is. So, really fascinating how NASCAR handled this, because, like I said, this is the best scenario. Really, the outcome is the best. A guy overreacted, got confused, thought the noose was intended for Bubba Wallace, immediately reports it. NASCAR, which has a history of either ignoring such things or not taking them very seriously at all, goes over the top, calls the FBI. Like, it still cracks me up, the idea of 15 FBI guys in one NASCAR garage, like all scanning the crime scene, quote unquote, like a pit crew or something. Like, how many guys you need to investigate a garage? I don't know. Anyway, they figure out it. All right. So in the end, there isn't some crazy racist clown bully trying to intimidate Bubba Wallace inside the NASCAR bubble, because no one could get into that thing. That's good. So in the end, this is the ideal solution. However, here we go. I've spoken to a bunch of people that, like, if you're NASCAR and you aren't transparent about it, could you be accused of covering it up? Right? Because these are, let me say this, if the mistakes were made, they were well-intentioned.
Oh, no doubt.
Like,
I don't doubt the intentions were good.
They're like, what do we do? What do we do? Like, if we sit there and say, we don't mention it, we have to tell Bubba, right? And then it's going to get out. And if we haven't said anything, and we haven't, like, it's so very, very difficult, challenging thing. The people that are ripping Bubba or claiming it's a hoax, my guess is those people are showing themselves.
No doubt.
And they were going to be rooting for Bubba Wallace anyway. Right. And, like, clearly Bubba Wallace is the victim here. I feel bad for him. Whatever. I look, as someone who's covered NASCAR for a long time, who's covered this issue for a long time, and could barely get anybody to even acknowledge that this was, I mean, like, I'm not African-American, but it was jarring the first time I went to one of the Southern races and saw 100. This is 15 years ago, or but 20 years ago. But so many 100 Confederate flags flying in the air. You're like, what is this? And I get some of that is cultural, but you just like I'm not familiar with this scene, and so it's jarring. And so I can only imagine how much worse it is for somebody else. And they just didn't even see it really as a problem back in the day. So the fact that this organization that took things way too lightly overreacted, but this is why it's the third rail. Mm-hmm. Even when you try and do something right, it can blow up on you in a second.
Well, so that brings me to the NCAA, because when it comes to trying to do something right and having it blow up on you, there's nobody better than the NCAA at that. That is pretty much, like, that could be their slogan. So they
well-intentioned,
right? Well-intentioned, but way off the mark.
Wondering, yeah.
Right.
What are you doing?
So last week they expanded their ban on their ban on championship events in states that have Confederate imagery. Basically, it's targeting Mississippi's flag, which is the only state in the union that still has that stars and bars in its flag. I lived in Mississippi 20 years ago. I was covering this story. I can't believe 20 years later I am still covering this story. But what happens is, so the NCAA makes this move, and then I write on Friday about the move, and I start reaching out to people. And what I end up hearing from, trying to find people who think, where does the NCAA stand on this, and what credibility does the NCAA have on this issue? What you get a lot of is, well, So let me understand this. The organization that fights to the death on amateurism, which is mostly taking money out of the hands of black athletes, now is taking this stand. So I think, again, you talk about well-intentioned, but is it the best messenger? And I'm wondering when the NCAA makes this move for you, as someone who has been who's been pretty hard on the NCAA and college sports, what are you thinking?
Yeah, the NCAA, to me, this is where it's just, I don't know that this is what the NCAA's purpose should be, And so now they're stepping forward on this and fine. I don't live in Mississippi. I could care less what's on their flag. I prefer there isn't. I'm not in favor of the Confederate flag. So, but what do they do? And they're like, taking away a sub-regional, a super regional of a baseball
probably,
series or
right. Yeah.
First
couple of rounds of an NCAA women's basketball tournament. Listen, that sucks for those schools if it were to happen, but, again, I don't know what kind of penalty it is, right. but that's what the penalty is.
We're not banning the Super Bowl from some state, right? So, but that does matter. And in an economy, and look, if you're the breakfast joint, as we said, or you're the Holiday Inn in Starkville, and you get a super regional, you filled up your hotel.
Yeah,
so it does matter to those businesses. I agree with you on, are they the right messenger? Amateurism, right? What is one of the biggest arguments on why amateur has to stay and the name, image, and likeness is wrong and all that? Well, we need, if you start sharing the profits of football and basketball with the athletes, we may have to cut some of our Olympic sports. Okay, well, let's take a deeper look at that. Majority of basketball and football players are African American.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's money you're saying you can't earn because we need to fund our Olympic sports where the majority of the the athletes are white. So it's like, how is that? If you dig deep, you're sitting there saying, I need my black football player to fill up the stadium and not take the money and fund my cross-country team, which is generally a bunch of suburban white people, right? And so if you're just playing those things, yeah, it's hard to say. One thing I do think is you can't let perfect be the enemy of progress. And so there's nobody out here without some kind of hypocritical stance. So I don't know what the NCAA should be involved in this. I think you're better off going with the player route where you're sitting there saying, hey, I don't want to play here, or this is hurting recruiting. I mean, they went through this with Ole Miss, and they basically came out and said, look, this is killing our recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, nothing that motivates college football fans more than it might hurt recruiting. So they think they can get one more 3-star from Stone Mountain, Georgia. They'll probably take that stars and bars off the flag. I don't know. But I don't know. It's very complicated, but I don't know that anyone's going to change their opinion because of what the NCAA said. It has to, at some point in that state, come from the people and the politicians that are willing to stand up and say, look, just enough's enough. We got to get rid of this thing. The way South Carolina did, the way Georgia did, the way a lot of other places did. Okay,
hey, one last thing here, and I feel like it's only fair when we're talking about sometimes we can be a little hypocritical here. We're talking about these issues, and I'm a 50-year-old white guy. You look younger than I am. I'll just say you are.
Not much, yeah.
Yeah, you're a white guy. We are working in a business where we have been super fortunate. Both of us have been really fortunate to do this great, exciting, awesome job that often we would do for free and make a nice living off of it. But our business, not great, right? How many press boxes do you show up in and you look around and there's only one or two faces that don't look like yours, whether they're women, people of color, just young people, quite frankly. So I want to shine the spotlight on us for a second here. How much thought do you give to how journalism can be better, how our business can be better? Let's just say sports journalism, because gosh, man, I even think about the people I've had on this podcast. I tend to stay in the sphere of college sports. There's not a lot of black college sports writers. There's not a lot of women. Nicole Auerbach and a few others. I just wonder how much thought. I don't know how much you've even given much thought to this, Dan. And I'm sort of sandbagging you with this question because I didn't give you a little heads up on it. But I do wonder how much you have given. What thoughts you might have on what our business can do better.
Well, I think about it a lot, actually, and I think neither of us are in positions of hiring, right? We can be in positions of encouragement and things like that. But I kind of feel like the one thing about journalism right now is it's under such economic assault, particularly of late. It's hard to hiring. There aren't a lot of hires. It's like, can you maintain, right? Almost everyone's staff is smaller, which just makes it that much more difficult. But it's certainly, looking out and trying to find that diversity, that's there and trying to encourage it. I think if you're not one of the people doing the hiring, if nothing else, you can try to at least listen to perspectives and people that are not like you and hear what they're saying. Like try to recognize just as simply as a reporter, right? Mm-hmm. Try to recognize what blind spot you might have and try to be fair to everyone. I think for a long time in sports, almost all the stories and all the perspectives were told through the institutions or the coaches and not necessarily through the players or the ones on the outside or the way up. And I don't want it to sound self-serving, but like one of the ways I always tried to cover college basketball was I started covering it really from the AAU side and kind of college football too. And so you get a very different perspective if you're covering the sport from the bottom up mm-hmm. than from the top down. So you'll hear a far different perspective if you're sitting around in the bleachers of an AAU tournament talking to parents and players and those coaches who aren't making millions of dollars than you would sitting in a commissioner's office talking about, television products and stuff like that. And so I think it's important to hear all those things. I think good reporters, look, every person can only have one life perspective, and the best reporters are chameleons that can go in and, I've been in some of the poorest homes in America, and I've dined with billionaires, and you have to figure out a way if you're a reporter to do both. Because even if you say, well, okay, this person's African, well, what if you're dealing with an Hispanic? What if just geographic, there's so many different things. So I think the key to trying to do good journalism, but beyond the hiring and all of those programs, is just trying to at least be open to all the different perspectives that are out there, and tell those stories. And I'll even swing it back the other way. That can even be, when dealing with the Confederate flag, when I first, like talking to people about why do you fly that flag? Mm-hmm. Because not everybody who flies that flag is, putting on is part of the Ku Klux Klan or see mm-hmm. themselves as talking to as many people as possible is what a reporter should do and try to represent, here's the argument, here's the perspective. It doesn't mean you agree with everyone. Like I said about Gundy, like you can hate him or not. He's an interesting guy. This is an interesting subject. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And at least trying to gather all of the perspectives without just close-minded out or not even, or walking blindly into it. And I think that's always been the big challenge of being a reporter, but I always think that's also the best part.
Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports is about as good as it gets in sports writing. Dan, man, thanks so much. I appreciate you taking time. Took a little bit more of your time than I thought, but I appreciate you hanging with me and visiting. Good luck getting through the next couple of months, man. It's going to be a wild ride. Hopefully we'll actually see each other maybe at a press box. Who knows? But hang in there, and again, appreciate you doing this.
Hope so. Always good talking to you, Ralph. Take care, man.
And now 3 and out. First down. Interesting transfer that was announced this week out of Missouri. KK Chisholm is a receiver from Division II Angelo State who is joining the Tigers. I can't give you a personal scouting report on Chisholm, but the size looks good at 6'4", 210, and he was a productive player in D2. Though production is so often based on style of offense and players that a player plays with. Eli Drinkwitz's first Missouri team was really depleted at receiver after most of the team's top targets moved on after last year. Chisholm is the second grad transfer receiver to join the Tigers along with Damon Hazelton, who played at Virginia Tech last year. Drinkwitz is a former offensive coordinator who Missouri seemed to overpay for to pull away from App State after just one season as head coach there. The Tigers have question marks all over their offense, including at quarterback. It figures to be a challenging first season on that side of the ball for Drinkwitz. Second down. The Belk Bowl is now the Duke's Mayo Bowl. I have really nothing else to add, but looking forward to that game in Charlotte after this season. Third down. 20 years ago, I was with the AP living in Jackson, Mississippi, covering sports. The state flag with its Confederate imagery was a hot topic back then. University leaders at Ole Miss had just passed some measures to get the Confederate flag out of the stands at Vaught Stadium by putting a ban on the flag poles. It was an end run of sorts, but leadership at the school realized that for a public university to thrive, especially in a state where a third of the residents are black, that a blatantly racist symbol had to go. But changing the state flag failed. It went to a vote in 2001, and keeping the flag won soundly. I didn't vote in that election, which was irresponsible and foolish. At the time, I thought, I'm not from Mississippi. I haven't been in Mississippi for very long. I'm probably not going to be in Mississippi for very much longer. I'll let them sort out their flag. That was a mistake. Back then, as is the case now, all the high-profile coaches in the state publicly backed changing the flag, explaining how it was an easy target for opponents to use against Mississippi schools in recruiting. Just like Dan said earlier. Honestly, I don't know how much that matters. It's impossible to quantify, and there are plenty of black players playing at Ole Miss and Mississippi State and Southern Miss right now. I'm seeing some of the same arguments made now by public officials that were being made then. The flag is a symbol of a Mississippi that many outside the state look down upon. It holds back financial growth. I'm not sure if there's any way to quantify that either. I really don't think it matters. I'm not very good at searching the internet, but my friend Rick Cleveland wrote a great column back in 2001 that always stuck with me. He was with the Clarion Ledger, the biggest paper in Jackson at the time. He mostly shrugged off a lot of the recruiting angles and the economic impact angle. Rick's point was, if your neighbor is telling you that the flag is a symbol of their oppression, that the flag represents hate and has been used for decades to intimidate and terrorize them, why wouldn't you simply respect your neighbor enough to make the change? I think that still stands today. And I'm confident I'm almost done writing about that flag. That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Warren Levinson, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Westwood One Podcast. Please subscribe so you do not miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening, and come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.